So you're going to tell me that you're a 7 to 9 fig operator who knows every KPI front to back, knows their P&L sheet like the back of their hand, but yet you've neglected your health to the point where you're on the brink of metabolic collapse and your business isn't too far behind because it's an interconnected system and your health, energy, decision-making capacity, and hormone levels are the engine that drives your business. So if you're neglecting your health and fitness by not knowing how to actually manage your biomarkers, your blood work, and everything in between, you're leaving millions on the table every single year unknowingly. You know that the health of your business rides on the quality and demand of your offer, but just as importantly is the efficiency of your systems. Your health and physiology are no different. So if you're living a high-stress, fast-paced lifestyle where our health is an afterthought, we're revving our engine to the red line every single day, throwing check engine lights, never servicing that oil, and the engine's about to blow unless you do something about it. Whether we like it or not, our metabolic health is the single most important predictor for how we show up inside our business day in and day out. It's what drives our energy, our mental clarity, decision-making ability, output, and provides us our hormonal foundation of testosterone to actually embody the role of a true leader and operator, making decisions swiftly without second-guessing yourself and embodying everything that we need to actually maximize our vehicle. The whole goal here is freedom. So if you're actually shackling yourself with your health by being negligent and sweeping that under the rug, your time's running out soon, and you better fix that before your business crumbles alongside it. Sadly, the lifestyle that we've chosen as an operator or entrepreneur as a whole is not the most conducive to overall health, stress management, and optimal physiology. We have a lot on our plates, and that leads to a lot of cumulative stress burden, which drives up cortisol. Our cortisol being chronically elevated is the first layer that kicks off a negative cascade of metabolic dysfunction that collapses our health from the inside out. Now, don't get me wrong, we need acute bouts of stress to actually drive positive adaptation, something called hormesis. But when we're exposed to stress chronically and we can't get out of this sympathetic-driven overdrive state where we can't turn our brain off, we have too much glutamate dominance, and we can't actually produce GABA to pull us down into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. We downregulate our HPA axis, our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so now our ability to actually produce cortisol is shunted, all sex hormones are shunted, so now our ability to produce testosterone is downregulated, our thyroid production is downregulated, and that chronically elevated cortisol also inhibits conversion of T4 to T3 in the liver, which drives up reverse T3 and shoves you into subclinical hypothyroidism. So even if you try and eat clean, you trying to get into a deficit, feels like a nightmare and damn near impossible. So when we're dealing with a dysregulated threshold or baseline of cortisol, aka stress hormone production, everything else from a neurochemistry standpoint takes a hit downstream. With chronic cortisol elevation, BDNF comes down, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is what helps us focus and also drives synaptic plasticity to actually learn new things. In accordance with BDNF, our dopamine release is very heavily aligned with BDNF. So now our dopamine response is downregulated and the receptors almost become deaf to that signal and desensitize. So now our ability to actually get in a flow state, work, and be productive is massively impacted just from the actual cortisol burden in and of itself. And now because we can't focus and work, guess what that does? Drives up more stress and inflammation and exacerbates that negative feedback loop. Now, thanks to this initial HPA axis dysfunction, driven from a fast-paced, higher stress lifestyle and this overall cortisol burden, now our ability to actually manufacture sex hormones downstream is severely impacted. This all starts at the hypothalamus where we secrete GnRH or gonad-releasing hormone. This then sends a signal to the pituitary gland to secrete luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, where we then produce testosterone downstream. If there's any dysfunction or inhibition up at the hypothalamus or pituitary level, our ability to manufacture that testosterone downstream is inhibited. So now what do we got? Now we got lower test level production. We've got impacted thyroid conversion at the liver. We've also got overtaxed adrenals to where we're cranking out stress hormone or cortisol at all times, and also other catecholamines like norepinephrine and adrenaline. If we can't buffer this adrenaline, we can't get into that parasympathetic rest and digest state, and we're stuck in that sympathetic overdrive. Now we can't think, we can't digest our food, we have irritable GI, we can't sleep, we can't focus, we can't work, we're just a strung out mess, and we're not an efficient operator the way we need to be. We can't make decisions clearly. We can't actually show up with high energy and drive maximal output. Now, we're just an anxious mess. What we've got to understand is this entire system is interconnected. When one layer of that system takes a hit, so does everything else downstream. Now, because our baseline of brain chemistry is impacted, our adrenals are overburdened, and our ability to manufacture thyroid and sex hormones is impacted. Now, this is creating a lot of additional stress on the body, which is now driving up free radicals and reactive oxygen species, which are damaging mitochondrial structures. Our mitochondria are our little engines or power plants that actually create energy. So if we start taking damage to these mitochondria, we now drive up this inflammatory burden, and we start driving metabolic dysfunction through insulin resistance. For context, for our brain and our muscle cells, our primary fuel source is glucose. If we have chronic inflammation, our cells begin to fall deaf to that signal that the beta cells in the pancreas secrete to actually produce insulin, which then drives that glucose into the muscle cell via GLUT4 translocation. So if this signal is inhibited, we now need to crank out more and more insulin, which is putting more burden on the pancreas, and we can only produce so much insulin. So if we can't actually dispose of that glucose, now we have too much insulin in the blood, and now we have too much sugar floating around in the blood via triglycerides, and this is beating up the inside lining of that artery called the endothelium, which is driving more and more inflammation and actually driving up our atherogenic or atherosclerotic risk, which is what's increasing our likelihood of a cardiac event. Now, because of this insulin resistance, our brain can't actually take up the glucose, which is what it wants as our primary fuel source. So now we're starving our brain cells of energy, so now that's driving our lethargy, our brain fog, pretty much everything else we don't want to deal with, while we have no energy to get through the day and we can't think. It's because your brain cells literally are starved of fuel due to chronic inflammation because of that insulin resistance response. Obviously, that insulin resistance doesn't just affect your cognition, it affects everything else downstream. Sex hormone production, thyroid production, and especially your ability to actually dispose of glucose and partition it productively towards glycogen, as opposed to just storing it as fat. When we have poor insulin sensitivity and we're insulin resistant, we have a very, very low likelihood of actually using glucose effectively, and we store as much of it as possible as fat because we have chronically high insulin levels. In the presence of insulin, we can't mobilize or actually use fat as energy, we can only store it. Obviously, this is an interconnected system-level nightmare, but where do we even start to fix these sort of things? Well, we can't shoot in the dark, we actually need data to make the initial decisions, so we've got to pull extensive lab work, which your primary care or telemed clinic is not going to do. When we're pulling labs, first thing we want to look at in this case is going to be cortisol. Now, obviously, this fluctuates day to day, and it also has a natural rhythmic pulse where it's highest in the morning and tapers towards the evening in alignment with our circadian rhythm and serotonin production. But if yours is flatlined due to being chronically elevated, obviously we've got to make some interventions pretty quickly. Next, we want to look at things like HSCRP, or highly sensitive C-reactive protein. This is our body's systemic inflammatory markers, letting us know, basically again, what our baseline inflammation is. We don't want that elevated because every system gets impacted heavily from there. Next, we'd be looking at things like homocysteine, because our body's ability to methylate, aka produce, break down, and excrete hormones that we make, as well as it also looks at the integrity of our cardiac vessels. Foundationally for metabolic health, we've got to look at fasting insulin. HbA1c is fine, but it's more of a 90-day glucose window. Fasting insulin and fasting glucose are what's showing you what's happening in real time. If you want to go one step beyond that, we should be looking at HOMA-IR, which is your ratio of fasting insulin to glucose. Next, beyond that, on the hormone side, obviously we got to look at total and free test. We can't just look at total because SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin, is what takes up and removes your body's ability to use most of the testosterone that you produce. So looking at free testosterone, this is actually what's absorbed at the tissue or muscle level. So free testosterone matters a lot more than total testosterone in the grand scheme. So we want to look at total, free, and SHBG in alignment. Obviously, we can't look at testosterone without looking at estrogen as well, which is going to be in the form of estradiol. When we have elevated estradiol, this is generally due to poor metabolic health, poor liver clearance due to sluggish bile flow, as well as generally poor body composition and insulin resistance. The fatter we are, the worse we use testosterone, because our adipose tissue or our fat is what carries the aromatase enzyme, especially visceral fat, which is what's surrounding your organs. Okay, so the more fat that we have, when we produce that testosterone, the more of it is initially aromatized or converted to estrogen. Now, obviously, we need healthy levels of estrogen for mood, energy, protecting our brain, protecting our heart, But when we're outside of the range, whether it's too high or too low, we start causing a lot of issues. When it's too high, mood swings, irritability, gynecomastia. When it's too low, mood swings, irritability, low libido, no gyno, but now you're actually stiffening up your arteries, you're driving down nitric oxide production, you're increasing your risk of a cardiac event massively, and because it dries out your joints, your incidence of actually getting hurt in the gym is much higher as well. So we want our estrogen within a normal range, which is normally in that 20 to 40 range for the average person. The single most important lever that we can pull, ensuring that our testosterone levels are adequate and we're not aromatizing too heavily, is ensuring that our body composition is on point. So if we're fat, it's almost guaranteed that we're going to have high E2 because we're aromatizing so much of that test and our utilization is so poor. So let's say we're carrying an extra 30 or 50 pounds of body fat that we don't need. If we strip that off, your body's ability to actually utilize and produce that testosterone now massively improves. In terms of estrogen clearance, I'm not a big fan of AIs or aromatase inhibitors unless you actually need it in the use case of you running a legitimate steroid cycle. If you're on HRT or you're not taking anything at all, you should never need an AI. You should only need, at the very most, things like DIM, which help shift our E2 or estradiol production from the more toxic pathways of 4 and 16-OH towards the more safe and more well-tolerated 2-OH pathway. And in addition, we have things like CDG or calcium D-glucarate, which help with phase 2 detox in the glucuronidation process in the liver, where we actually package up these toxic metabolites and get them out of the body. Before we continue on the blood markers, if we want to support estrogen clearance, we need to support liver health, where we actually excrete these metabolites and hormones. So we need things like TUDCA, tauroursodeoxycholic acid, which helps us produce the bile in the first place. We need NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which helps refill our glutathione pool, which is our body's first line of defense against free radicals and inflammation. And we also need things like phosphatidylcholine, aka PC, which helps improve cell membrane fluidity and improve the environment for that bile to flow in the first place. Back on the blood work side, we got to pull lipids, but different than your PCP or traditional doctor is going to pull. On average, they're really only going to look at HDL, LDL, and total cholesterol. If your total cholesterol even smells like 200, they're going to fearmonger you into wanting to put you on a statin, which you should never do. That's the worst thing that you can ever put in your body, because these statins directly deplete CoQ10 from the mitochondria. They drive ATP failure from that mitochondrial dysfunction, and then we drive further metabolic disease. We drive dementia, improved cardiac risk, we decrease endothelial integrity, so the elasticity of our arteries gets decreased. It's the worst thing you could ever put in your body, so don't worry about that. What you should be worried about is triglycerides. Triglycerides are the fat currency your body has, and that's what's floating throughout your body at all times. If your triglycerides are elevated, that's the issue. Your HDL should be 40 plus. Ideally, we want it as high as possible. But if your triglycerides are higher than your HDL, that's the biggest issue. The first thing we should actually be worried about is triglycerides. If our triglycerides are elevated, to put it in perspective, that's our body's fat currency. If we have all of this fat that's floating throughout our blood at all times, destroying that endothelium and driving up our risk of a heart attack because of the damage to the endothelium or artery lining, that's actually what's creating the atherosclerotic cascade. If our triglycerides are elevated, that's the first lever we want to pull to improve metabolic health. Our HDL should be 40 plus, ideally as high as possible. But if our HDL is lower than our triglycerides, that's the issue. Most people's triglycerides are far too high. On the actual lipid side, continuing on, LDL in isolation, like LDL-C, doesn't matter. LDL-P is the more damaging, smaller, dense lipoproteins that actually get stuck in the artery lining. So we want to look at LDL-P. In addition, we should be pulling ApoB, which is our body's total number of circulating atherogenic particles. Okay, it doesn't dictate what's actually in there. It's just telling us what's the total amount of lipoproteins we have in our blood. From there, we should look at lipoprotein A, or LPA, which is our inherited genetic risk factor in terms of atherogenic risk. We can modulate this with things like niacin or B3, but that's our actual most important thing to look at from inherited genetic cardiac risk. We can also pull VLDL, or very low density lipoproteins, because that's what your body uses to package up triglycerides from the chylomicrons and actually export them out to be deposited in your adipose tissue or stored as fat. Okay, if we have elevated VLDL, that means our triglycerides are way too high. We don't want elevated VLDL, but if we run ApoB and we see total particle count is elevated, triglycerides are up and VLDL is elevated, now we know the first lever we should really be pulling. Next, your average doctor is going to scare you with AST and ALT for liver enzymes, but we actually carry ALT in skeletal tissue, aka muscle, as well. If we want to truly look at the health of our liver, we got to look at GGT. because our liver is our biggest detox organ, which helps us maintain that redox balance, or basically the efficiency of electron flow and deployment of antioxidants to actually dispose of free radicals and inflammation. So, if our liver is overburdened, that GGT number is going to be severely elevated as well. A little more upstream, we can pull things like DHEA sulfate or pregnenolone to let us know how our body's manufacturing sex hormones upstream. We also obviously want to pull LH and FSH if we have any issues with testosterone production, or whether we're gauging not really the testicular viability, but the signal itself at the hypothalamus and pituitary. I know I went through a lot, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds and the nuance of the metabolic health aspect, but what is that actually doing for your business? Well, if you're operating at 50, 60% of your potential energy output, how much money do you feel that you're leaving on the table every single year in your business due to the poor decision-making ability, the lack of energy, the second guessing, the lack of confrontation? All these sort of things compound into a less efficient engine that drives the machine. Okay, and it's not just total cash flow or profitability every year that aligns with enterprise value as well. So now we're potentially losing out on tens of millions over the course of an exit, because now we're not operating as effectively as we can as a true leader and operator, because we've left our metabolic health on the table and completely swept that under the rug. Now, obviously, physiologically, to perform at our best, we need the right metabolic health. But also, to perform the best from a psychological standpoint, we need to be truly proud of who we are, and that confidence comes from action, voluntary adversity, and showing up, putting ourselves in the position to win, doing the hard shit, doing the things that other people would generally avoid, but we know that this is what's going to get us closer to where we want to be, and that's generally through being physically active and nutritionally conscious, putting some degree of effort into sleep hygiene and stress management. You're a ticking time bomb if you neglect the basics, but when you actually nail the fundamentals, now you have undeniable confidence, and your physique and outward expression is going to reflect that, and no one can ever take that away from you. When you're genuinely proud of what you see in the mirror, because only you put in that effort, again, no one can take that away from you, and no one else did it for you, that creates an undeniable level of confidence and capacity that carries over to every other aspect as a leader and operator. If we're not confident in who we are because we've avoided the hard work, how do we think that extends out to every direction in our life, especially our business? Like it or not, how we do one thing's how we do everything. Your business might be doing well, but if you're neglecting the most foundational piece that keeps it running, your business ain't too far behind, right? You're obviously leaving potential on the table in your business, and I know there's things that you're slacking on there too, right? But it's not just about the business itself. It's about you being able to actually enjoy the fruits of your labor. The reason you're building this vehicle is for freedom at the end of the day, right? You don't just want to run a business forever. You're trying to leverage this vehicle to create freedom for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for those that you love. But if you don't actually build the foundation of health, how are you ever going to enjoy that? It's pointless, right? If you don't invest in your health now, you're going to end up paying way too much for it. You either invest in it now or you pay for it with medical bills. Gratitude and appreciation for our own lives and the opportunities that we have in front of us are expressed through imperfect, massive action every day, generally doing the shit that we don't want to do. Now, it's super easy to say we want more, or that we want to be the best version of ourselves, or we're going to become a new person in the new year, whatever it is. Super easy to say that, but the only thing that really matters is the action that drives the result that we're looking for. So if you're overlooking the foundational things that drive your energy, your confidence, your mental clarity, your relationships, everything in between, dude, you're doing yourself such a disservice, and your business, you're obviously leaving an immense amount on the table there too. So there's amazing tools that we have also in addition, things like hormone optimization with HRT and GH replacement. There's great peptides out there, things like SS31, MOTS-C, retatrutide, amazing shit out there. But unless you're nailing the primitives of the nutrition, the sleep, the stress management, and the exercise, you're shooting yourself in the foot. None of that other shit matters at all. So if you're sick and tired of settling for mediocre and less than your best, and you know that you're genuinely destined for more, click the link in my bio. Let's create a custom game plan to take you from wherever you are now to exactly where you want to be. I'll fully streamline and systematize the process to optimize your physiology front to back. Everything from the nutrition, the training, exercise, peptides and supplements, hormone optimization and blood work, as well as PFA, environmental load exposure, and genetic analysis. So we create the custom game plan for you, no cookie cutter bullshit, something that actually aligns with your DNA and your genetics. Right? If this sounds interesting, click the link in my bio and we'll talk soon.